With less than 4 months until Election Day, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina faces a relatively competitive re-election race as he seeks a fourth term. His Democratic challenger has gained name recognition and raised a significant amount of money in recent months. And election forecasts earlier this year shifted their analyses of this race from solid to likely Republican, indicating it is getting more competitive. Senator Graham's fight to keep his seat in the Senate comes as he begins to split from President Trump on several issues. An unusual move, as he is seen as one of the president's top allies and has defended him in the past. According to a recent article published by The State, Senator Graham has publicly opposed the president 5 times in the past few weeks. Jack Kelly wrote that article and joins me now with more. Jack, thanks very much for joining us. In your piece, you talk about several cases where Senator Graham disagrees with the president. Are these mostly recent disagreements, and what are some examples?
Hi, thanks for having me. It's great to be on. So the disagreements have been common in the last few weeks, much more so than we usually see from Senator Graham. So they range on a lot of things. Graham came out pretty hard against the president about the president's decision to halt work visas for foreign workers. Included among those are H-1B visas, which we've heard a lot about in the last couple of years of this administration. They've been smaller things too. You know, Graham pushed back on the president about whether Americans should be wearing masks in public. Trump has been very resistant to that. He himself, to my knowledge, has not done so in public, at least in front of the news media. And even yesterday, we saw a second ago, Graham came to Bubba Wallace's defense saying he has nothing to apologize for, saying that this is a good moment for NASCAR. The drivers had come together. And, Graham even came out and said that removing the Confederate flag from NASCAR races is good for business. It's the right decision, which is something that Trump has also been critical of. So it's been more frequent and it's been more public in recent weeks than we've seen.
So then, Jack, the question is there any strategy here behind Senator Graham's opposition to the president as he seeks re-election?
I mean, the political calculus here remains a little bit unclear, right? Graham remains popular in South Carolina. Trump remains popular in South Carolina. So whether there's strategy behind it or it's just Lindsey Graham being his own man, which I have heard from, several longtime players in the Republican Party of South Carolina, it remains to be seen a little bit what the thinking here is for Graham. I will say, though, some of these issues that Graham is standing up to the president on are ones that he has stood up to many administrations on, being foreign work visas and things like that.
So, the question is also, do you think at this point, or is it clear even, whether Senator Graham distancing himself from the president somewhat will hurt or ultimately help the senator come November?
So I think it remains a little bit unclear. What we do know is that if Jamie Harrison, Graham's opponent, who's well-funded, if he wants to be successful, he's going to have what one election handicapper described to me today as crossover supports. Basically, Harrison is going to need voters who are going to back the president to also vote for him if he's going to want to have any chance at ousting Lindsey Graham. What goes into that? Well, we've seen kind of white, educated, suburban voters souring on the president in recent months. We saw it back in 2018. So, maybe as Graham trying to distance himself from the president to, remain popular among those folks, we can't be sure, but that's one potential item.
Tell us a little bit more about Jamie Harrison. Who is he? What's his political background? What kind of campaign has he been running?
Sure. So Jamie Harrison has been in politics for a long time. When he finished school, he became the director of floor operations for Majority Whip Jim Clyburn, of course, a congressman from South Carolina. He's a former chairman of the South Carolina Democratic Party. He ran to be the DNC chairman before bowing out and endorsing Tom Perez. He's been around politics for a long time, though we've never seen him run like this before. He's run a pretty clean campaign. He's raised a ton of money, as we've mentioned, and so far, his focus was on energizing people about him. It's only in the last week that we saw him come out with an attack ad kind of against Lindsey Graham very publicly. So it'll be interesting to see what happens between now and November, especially with what the Harrison campaign plans to do.
You mentioned the money that's been raised. Harrison's campaign says it raised nearly $14 million between April and June, breaking a state fundraising record. How significant, Jack, is that sum, a very large sum of money, in a state like South Carolina? You mentioned the need for Jamie Harrison to try to get those crossover votes. But, with that kind of money, how does that what role does that play in a place where, it really has been Trump country, South Carolina has for a while now?
Yeah, it is significant, right? That $14 million in a Senate race raises eyebrows. It's more than some of the other than we've seen Democrats raise in some of the other competitive Senate races across the country. But I think it's important also to keep in mind the big picture. Throughout the cycle, Graham had raised more money than Harrison still. Will Harrison outraise Graham this quarter? We don't know. The Graham campaign has not released their Q2 fundraising totals, but I think it is significant. It shows that he's well connected. Some of this money must be coming from people in South Carolina, or at least you would expect to. We haven't seen the official filing yet, at least I haven't. And so, it is significant. I think it is important, though, that, after he raised all of this money at the end of Q1, Graham still maintained a cash on hand advantage over Harrison. We'll have to see, when both campaigns file come the middle of the month, what that cash on hand comparison looks like. The Harrison campaign, spending a lot of money on TV ads, didn't release that figure when they announced this almost $14 million that they raised.
All right, fascinating dynamic shaping up there in South Carolina. Jack Kelly of The State. Jack, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.